Hey everybody, welcome back to Pro AV Today. This is another episode of our series focused on the impact of the consumer world into B2B technology. We want to talk a little bit more today about the channel side. So the impact of things like e-commerce as a service models, but also the impact of the commercial side of the world on the consumer side, and see how maybe some of the inverse opportunities are happening from the commercial side back over to the consumer side, especially from things like product development, user preferences, things like that. And to talk about that today, I've got my next guest, Mark Peterson from Shen, Milson Wilke. Mark, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you very much, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Mark, for our viewers who've been following along in this series, just to recap quickly, we've talked a lot about consumer technologies. Maybe it's at-home speakers, maybe it's AI assistants and technology and things like that. Really wanted to focus a little bit more today as somebody who, like yourself, is an expert in the AV kind of commercial installation world, but also the consultancy world, where you're able to grab a lot of those preferences and understand user demands and how they drive our installation. So at a high level, can you give us just a quick overview of maybe some of the high-level technologies and ways that you've seen that commercial preference drive that B2B side of the AV technology?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things we start with is that concept of the shift in the buyer behavior. And the same thing we're seeing with the consumers happening in the commercial market with the buyers of the products. They are expecting to be able to have much more of a online purchasing opportunities. And the portals, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of these B2B online marketplaces and customer portals become the way in which clients can buy and select products. But at the same time that's happening, a lot of the products that are going into these commercial spaces are really getting quite mature. And the differentiation that's happening is less on the technology of the product, but the bolt-on value-added services. And that's where we're really seeing the shift, where when you would think about previously, like someone saying, well, why don't I go to Best Buy and buy a display, right? And it's shifting because there are other values that are associated with that display. And most of that is multiple displays, managing a lot of products, knowing what's being shown on those displays, knowing when they're working and not working, and also those value services and day two support. So those bolt-ons or added services are really quite effective in that online marketplace, because I think previously you've just been sort of like fluff on left on a contract, and now they can menuize the items that they actually want to select, what services and response times that they want to have from manufacturers, right down to specific rooms and specific SLAs. I think the other thing we want to look at is the concepts of consumer choice, right? Which typically is this rational thing where customers are on a budget and they're going to look to gain the most out of the budget that they have, right? And yet the global instability is causing a lot of change here. Customers' values are changing. It's inconsistent behavior. And there needs to be an understanding from the B2B world that it's a lot less predictable as to what their customers are expecting to have happen. We're seeing also this conflict where previously it was all about their own, personal company preferences, but now there's a lot of ESG, sensitivity to the environment, governance and sustainability that's also influencing, right, the product developments and product choices that are happening in the B2B market. And that means companies have to be really positioned to not underestimate these customer behaviors and the fact that their customers are multifaceted and they're doing their best to kind of adapt to the current situations. And because of the market changes, there's going to be a lot more of this focus on what they can spend their money on. So previously innovation would happen because they got a lot of money. You can say, I want the best, I want something new, I want to be competitive, I want to show off. But now it's much more about what can I get out of the money that I have available this year? How do I best budget that money over the next year or two?
Well, one of the things that I really enjoy about our collective industries over the last probably 5 or so years, and COVID obviously was an accelerant for this, but I think we finally realized that our end users exist both in the home and in the office space, and they like some comfortability and familiarity and things like that. But, one of the trends, and you and I have actually had a chance to talk about this a little bit before off air, is, technology has empowered things like community and empowering the human experience and servicing the human condition, especially as you talk about maybe it's initiatives like ESG, more, I almost hate to call it the lightweight stuff that feels derogatory. I promise it's not, but more of the heady, lightweight stuff. We see a lot of these technologies really aiming to empower that, whether it's ESG, communal based, whether it's DEI, all sorts of different things like that. Talk about the ways that you've seen that technology and some of that drive from the human condition empower how we're developing and delivering that technology.
Most manufacturers weren't really caught off guard because their employees and their teams were actually experiencing the same upending scenarios, right? Meanwhile, we had ship and chip issues, right? We had struggled just to get products out the door. So they knew they had to be able to create products. And in fact, what we've seen is actually fairly rapid response. If you look at the typical time frame to deliver products that are in demand, it's typically multiple months, half, 3/4 of a year to get those products manufactured. And they actually turned around quite quickly in response to the need to create these hybrid spaces. And what I'm talking about is dominantly the camera switching and the camera ability to crop images and create and stitch images so that people that were remote looked kind of consistent with people that were in the spaces. But what's happened here is that there's really a new strategy approach. Previously, companies wanted to create an ecosystem where all their products worked effectively by their systems and everything's going to be hunky-dory. Now they're coming up with these windshield wipers. The windshield wipers are on the buses, and the buses are Zoom and Teams. And that made that's quite why they were able to rapidly develop products, because they had, key issues of having to be certified and meet these platform demands, but it's also exposed them to being much more vulnerable to competition, because now they're the same larger companies at the same level as smaller ones to against the market and what the customers were have choices, a lot more choices. There's a lot less partiality for one company over another because of the influences of the economy. It's at the lowest level, whether it's you're a consumer or whether you're in a business, you have choices to go to a different company. But meanwhile, the platforms now become the ones that want to dominate the story and be, you either on Zoom or you're on Teams. Clients want to have both experiences. They need both experiences, but their product, the platforms are reluctant to give that up because they don't want to give up the eyeballs. So we're really seeing this sort of race to the lowest price, this red ocean competition on the product side, and the certification really driving this. But I think what we're also seeing, if we step a little bit more deeper into this, Ben, that the concept around meeting equity and the impact on these human desires to feel like you're part of the space, where that's now happening, particularly is when you want to be at home or you want to be at the workplace, the new products tools need to respond to that. And that isn't a camera, right? That is software and it's intelligence. And I think that's where the AI influence is really going to be important. We'll talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and what's interesting too, and you touched on a little bit, is we talk about this rapid development of technology where I might go with a provider today, but next month there's another feature that comes out and I want to switch, right? There's this, not that it didn't exist fully before, but there's almost this on-demand immediacy effect. And ironically enough, that is driven from the natural desire of, we get a new cell phone every 6 months, a year. We get all these different things, and I can turn on Netflix and watch whatever movie I want at any given time. And I can go to Amazon and I could get something in 2-3 hours sometimes. It's interesting to see that play out in the commercial and B2B technology world, where innovation is expected to happen overnight, right? We used to have these full beta cycles and full preferred alpha users and things like that. But how has that need for on-demand, whether it's just things like streaming or just on-demand preferences in general, impacted consumer preferences, or impacted not only consumer preference, but the B2B need for quick innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll do my best to answer this one because it's really right on the edge, right? I mean, we're seeing on the streaming market this shift from being within the channel to having more choices and people being willing to accept commercials, right, and accept programming to have those choices. In fact, they're getting to the point where the TVs are coming out for free. They'll give you a TV if you're willing to watch on another display the commercials, right? So we're looking at the options of how to consume the content play out. What we're if you take that into the commercial market, we're seeing a lot of more younger generations consuming content in different ways, in multiple ways, right? One display or one stream of content is not sufficient anymore. I mean, people are consuming content like spectacle, right? Playing game, watching gamers play games while they're doing other things at the same time. And so where we had previously, been myopic, and you have one share content in a meeting space or in a collaboration space, now we need to see, and we're experiencing multiple content concurrently. And that's the best example of that is like Microsoft Front Row, where you have to be able to see your chat, your content, and your streamed content, your other threaded content that's happening in a completely different parallel, asynchronous and synchronous collaboration occurring simultaneously. And this is coming from, I think, a generation of people that have lived in this environment. They're consuming more and more content in different channels simultaneously. So that's what I think. That's what we're going to see more of that impact on the way we design spaces and the way we integrate a relationship of experience and personal attention to the employee.
Well, I'm curious too. I want to kind of stick on a point that you brought up, right? You talked about that TV experience where folks are able to kind of have ads in the background, or you look at loss leaders like the Amazon Alexa devices or the Roku devices, streaming sticks, or whatever. Those are typically loss leaders for those companies. Is that something that you see transitioning to the B2B world, where folks are saying, "Hey, we're willing to trade you technology for information at scale"? Is that something that you're seeing happen regularly?
No, I'm not seeing that yet, but there's the potential for that. The service model is the driver, right? Just like with those streaming services, the subscription is where the revenue is. It's not the initial buy. So where the revenue streams are longer and the engagement with that company is longer, there's greater opportunity to sell that service at a lower cost upfront. I mean, for example, a company that may be doing design services at one end and providing support at the other end may reduce the fees that they're charging to a company if they can extend their engagement longer. So I think that would be an example of a loss leader, right? From a service side as opposed to a physical side. I'm not seeing as much of the manufacturers giving away hardware, still playing the game of tech improvements, and yet they are substantially introducing much lower cost end products that can do most of what the higher end used to do. And we're seeing that come up quite a bit now. So competing at that bleeding edge, low cost value entry, particularly in the display market, right, where it's kind of already matured. And I can get away with a lot of displays that, if I'm putting them in, that don't have to have a lot of the smarts to them. And meanwhile, I could connect in with that same manufacturer and manage all those displays plus displays that are really critical spaces through the same portals.
Well, Mark, now I've got to ask, right? We've talked a lot about the impact of consumers on B2B technology. Want to kind of flip that on its head a little bit, right? Whether it's the more affordability nature of the technology, or whether it's some of the traditional buying cycles and channels or experiences, expectations in the B2B world. How are you seeing the B2B side continue to influence the consumer side?
Yeah. And I want to make sure, Ben, we also get to this retail influence and what's happening there, right? On the B2B side, if we look at what happened out of 2018 with 5G being introduced and where 4G was introduced prior to that, the innovation gets bottled up during economic downturns, right? And then they kind of launch themselves out as soon as the economy gets going. Well, that's not quite consistent right now, right? We don't know where we are in the world, but the process right now is that out of that pandemic, where companies really had to become innovative to be able to get products out the door and deal with supply shortages, is certainly introduced a lot of the drive. We didn't even know. Did we really know that we wanted self-driving cars? No. I mean, that wasn't our choice. It was something it was introduced by manufacturers. We're seeing a lot of that happening with autonomous vehicles and unlocking features that were previously, they're in the car, but they aren't yet. You don't have to have the heated seats. You can unlock that feature when you need it. We see that, of course, even Zoom conferencing is an example of where the industry kind of drove what was happening into the consumer market. And artificial intelligence is really also a big part of this, like situation and emotional recognition that's happening in call centers now. So consumers are experiencing that, and now they're going to want to have that capability in their devices and that what will work for them. We're seeing the larger displays being made by these manufacturers for bigger rooms, and the technology that's happening in direct view LED coming down and more competitive for flat panels that consumers are buying. And so that's actually another example of a shift where the innovations in commercial is being brought into the consumer market.
Well, one of the places you see tons and tons of LED technologies in that retail world, right? Whether it's digital signage, display, virtual try-on, that's one of the places really that you're seeing a lot of that symbiosis from the commercial and the consumer side happen as well. Can you elaborate on some of how those retail store experiences and expectations are continuing to kind of play into the influence of the symbiosis?
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting area because typically the consumer is seeing a completely different experience where they're doing e-commerce when they're walking into retail. They're disconnected. And the brands are trying to stitch this back together. They want to have sort of this, what they call an omni-channel, where the content is consistent whether you're at home or online. Walmart's kind of leading the example here where companies are trying to become more consistent. And the biggest challenge has been the product content, the images that they're using on what you see on when you're shuffling through Amazon versus when you're coming into a store, completely different sources. And CGI, computer-generated graphics, and AI have opened the door to be able to allow for these retailers on their own, sort of DIY, use this content, create content, bring it into the digital domain, and then apply it in multiple ways. And this is really quite exciting because we're seeing a lot of things like image tagging, where you can identify the products that are in images, right? Without having to have any text. I can identify those images and reverse that with cameras in the retail space, identifying products that people are wearing without having any text, and then utilizing that data to trigger content that's relevant to whatever they're seeing on those cameras without necessarily identifying and personifying the individuals themselves. And also we're seeing things like placing product within new virtual spaces, right? It isn't relevant unless I can see what that product looks like in my space. And obviously that's happening quite frequently now. You're seeing that on these e-commerce, show me what this looks like. Another example of that is augmented reality, where Nike and other stores, you can create the sneaker of your choice by doing image projection and seeing the concept of what that object will look like. Seeing it in dressing rooms where people can try and buy, which wouldn't really be practical, sofas and things like that, where they can see these images and kind of replicate what is actually going to be in their space. And this concept now becomes really important in the commercial area, because if you look at what we're trying to do in these spaces, like put a $200,000 display on a wall, right? And you look at the product page of some of these display manufacturers, you see a display, you have no context of what that actually is going to require. In fact, it takes more time, a lot more time, to create the box that display is going to go into, right? The setback on the wall, the height of it, the infrastructure, the ventilation, all of this work goes on for just one location, right? And so there needs to be much more of a ability for manufacturers to carry over to the architects exactly what's going to look like. The buyer is the owner. They're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these products, and they want to know that there's an emotional connection. What's this going to look like for me? How is this going to be in my space, right? Not just any space, but my identity is associated with this buy. And so that there's going to be a lot more of that utilization of computer generated graphics to place these products early on in the development cycle in front of the buyers, the B2B buyers, to make decisions quicker and faster and to implement and execute much faster than previously.
Well, the retail world has been one of the places that you always see kind of the bleeding edge of what's happening next from a consumer and a professional side. I hate to say professional, we'll call it commercial side, because there's always that ebb and flow happening, right? Where sometimes you'll see the retail community lean a little bit more towards the experiential side and the in-store experience. Other times it'll ebb back to the e-commerce side of things. And it's always been a really, really interesting place to look towards kind of what's happening and what sort of pendulum swings we're going to see next. And I want to ask you this to kind of land the plane. You know, Mark, when you look down the road 5-10 years, what would you say excites you the most about the continued convergence of these two worlds?
I guess they call it physical, like this term that the blending of the digital images and the physical experience. And I think what excites me a lot right now is the effort to bring the awareness of situational awareness to the employee, right? I'm now, when I'm going into the office spaces, not only do I need to know if a room is available, I want to know where you are, Ben, where you're sitting, and I want to be able to engage with you. You're not in the office all the time, right? And up until now, I don't know when you're going to be in the office and where you're going to sit. And companies are recognizing that in order to bring people back into the spaces, in order to make them productive, they need to be able to create these personalized situations. And what we're looking for then from these sort of where's Ben and hey, let's go get a cup of coffee, is something called collisions, or hopefully they'll become digital. But if we meet and we unintentionally, right, a lot of what we do right now is purposeful. We schedule meetings, we execute, and we go on our way, and we never have a chance to really intersect, and meet happenstance. But that's where creativity and spontaneity happens. That's where new insights happen, because you're out of your regular typical zone and you're seeing things that you normally don't see. What I'm hoping to see is that these products that are creating this opportunity for us to know where we are in situational awareness will also create opportunities for us to collide, to intersect unexpectedly on the digital platforms, right? So rather than just having your scheduled meetings, but having ways that I could see and meet with people. Some companies are taking this to the point where at the end of their town halls or end of their weekly or daily meetings, they'll have a 5-minute hit where they'll just put the entire call into subgroups so that people don't even know who they're going to be with for those last 5 minutes. And they're meeting with people unexpectedly. And this is what's really exciting to me, is seeing the way that we can apply technology to behavior to create more opportunities to be innovative and spontaneous and personal, because there's been so much effort to kind of get out of the pandemic and productionize and execute on a very tactical approach, which doesn't leave as much emotional engagement as we need.
Well, digital collisions, that sounds like its own podcast title in its own right. And I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation, really centralizing it around that human experience, right? Making sure that we as humans have an opportunity to be empowered by technology to interact with each other and best serve our communities. So, Mark, I appreciate you giving us that feedback and jumping on the show today. And I'm sure we'll find a way to have you on very soon.
Thank you, Ben.
And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and join us again next time on Pro AV Today.